listening to Give God 90, where we're not afraid of the tough biblical questions, because we will dig through the language, the culture, and the history to find the truth revealed in the words of our Creator.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for letting us spend some time with you today. I am being monitored and supervised, or I might be the one monitoring, supervising today. I'm not sure which.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us.
We certainly do appreciate it. If you like what you hear, those like buttons and share buttons, notifications, all those things just make it easier for people to find us, just like you did. Interesting news this week, I think. And it probably happened sometime yesterday or today. We have finally been heard on all 7 continents.
Yay!
That might not sound like much, but there are people who have a lot more listeners than we do, and they've not done that. So, I want to thank each and every one of you for being faithful, and that's why you hit those share buttons and like buttons and all those kind of things, so that you can
absolutely
make it easier for people to find us. So, imagine my voice, such as it is, has been heard on all 7 continents in the world. Oh, what were they thinking? Oh, well. Every so often, I am asked, different questions, but one every few years keeps popping up, and it's, whose laws am I supposed to follow? And typically this happens when somebody's having an election or something political is going on. Whose laws am I supposed to follow? Especially when, our government's laws seem to be in conflict with what God's telling us to do, right? The quick answer, and this is what you're going to get from a lot. You have to obey this as many as you can, right? But sometimes it's just not that easy, right? People want to know, is it a sin if I get a speeding ticket? Is it a sin if I get a parking ticket? Well, you have to know what sin is, of course, right? Sin is a violation of the Creator's laws, His instructions. 1 John 3:4, whoever commits sin transgresses the law, for sin is a transgression or a violation of the law. And it's talking about John's saying here, and this is after the resurrection, after the ascension, that sin is a violation of the laws or the instructions given through Moses. That's what he's saying. It's that simple. So when a king or a government establishes a law that conflicts with what the Bible instructs, is it a sin to obey that law? The short answer there would be yes, right? Is there going to be retribution by the government if you don't obey his laws? Well, yeah. And we have examples of that, right? Let's listen to what happened to Daniel.
The supervisors, assistant governors, the people who advise you, and the captains of the soldiers have all agreed on something. We think the king should make this law that everyone would have to obey. No one should pray to any god or man except to you, our king. This should be done for the next 30 days. Anyone who doesn't obey will be thrown into the lion's den. Now our king make the law. Write it down so it cannot be changed. The laws of the Medes and the Persians cannot be canceled. So King Darius made the law and had it written. When Daniel heard that the new law had been written, he went to his house. He went upstairs to his room. The windows of that room opened toward Jerusalem. 3 times each day, Daniel got down on his knees and prayed. He prayed and thanked God, just as he always had done. Then those men went as a group and found Daniel. They saw him praying and asking God for help. Daniel chapter 6, verse 7 through 11.
So, what happens next, right? Daniel gets basically arrested, even though he works for the king, and he's put in a lion's den. And, of course, miraculously, the lions don't eat Daniel. Right? Daniel, as close as he was to the king, as close as an advisor as he was to the king, he still got put in the lion's den. Basically, the king understood that, he'd been tricked. It's something you don't want to do to the king. So, I don't want anyone to think that every time somebody who chooses to follow the Creator's instructions instead of man's instructions, that some miracle is going to happen, and it's going to save you from physical death. It doesn't always happen that way. Sometimes following his instructions is going to get you killed. Do I need to mention anybody other than Yeshua, Jesus, at this point? He followed the Creator's instructions, and what happened to him? Remember, David writes in Psalm 116:15, precious in the sight of the Lord is the death of his saints. Sometimes being killed for the right reason, I know that sounds odd, but if we die for the right reason, it actually glorifies the Almighty. Right? Christians, do I need to mention Yeshua again? Our Jewish listeners know who I'm talking about. Right? So where does it leave us today? It's a world turned upside down, right? World turned totally upside down. Now, before Daniel and the lion's den lesson, we have another lesson. So listen to what happens to these gentlemen.
Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered the king. They said, Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves to you. You can throw us into the blazing furnace. The God we serve is able to save us from the furnace and your power. If he does this, it is good. But even if God does not save us, we want you, our king, to know this. We will not serve your gods. We will not worship the gold statue you have set up. Then Nebuchadnezzar was furious with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He ordered the furnace to be heated 7 times hotter than usual. Then he commanded some of the strongest soldiers in his army to tie up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. The king told the soldiers to throw them in the blazing furnace. Daniel chapter 3, verse 16 through 20.
Hopefully you know the rest of that. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came out of that fiery furnace. That's the way I always heard it when I was growing up. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the fiery furnace. They didn't even smell like smoke. Of course it's miraculous. What else could it be? But like I said, and they said it here, even if our God doesn't save us, we want you to know we're not doing what you tell us to do because it's just not right. It's just not right. I'm going to use an extremely exaggerated example here. So let's pretend for a moment, all right, you happen to live in a monarchy. A monarchy is ruled by a king or a queen. It's a true monarch. And the king, who's not very nice, all of a sudden decides, you know what? I don't like purple people. I just don't think they have a reason to live. So the king sends out a decree, and he says, look, all purple people must be killed, but they can only be killed by people whose name begins with the letter Q. Now, I picked the letter Q because there's not a lot of people names begin with letter Q, right? That's the only reason I picked it. Nothing else going on there. So let's pretend your name happens to start with the letter Q. And you're a believer, and you know that God says don't murder, which is to kill someone without just cause. And just because the king decrees it, might not be always be just cause, right? Who are you going to obey, God or the king? Now, in this, what I hope is an outrageous example, there seems to only be two choices. But if you remember a few weeks ago, we talked about the third option, right? There may be several. I picked two to look at. One is you can change your name. Then you don't have to worry because your name doesn't begin with Q anymore. Hey, you're not chosen to go out and murder people unjustly. Another third option might be you can find a way where you're able to avoid even seeing any purple people. So there's always something you can do to not be in a position where you think you're going to wind up. You can take some action and hopefully through prayer and a lot of contemplation with that. Now, you might be thinking about some Bible verses that talk about being obedient to civil rulers, kings and queens and governments. But most of the time, especially for Christians, they're going to go to Romans 13. And there's a problem here. You see, not all of the manuscripts agree. So there is a question if Paul even wrote it. It doesn't pass the scholarly test of reading like other things we know Paul has written, both linguistically and grammatically. So we need to go look at some other places for this reference, if you want to read through those.
Keep the king's command, I say, because your oath before God. Ecclesiastes chapter 8, verse 2. My son, fear the Lord and the king, and do not associate with the rebellious. Proverbs 24:21. And to Zedekiah, king of Judah, I spoke the same message. Put your necks under the yoke of the king of Babylon. Serve him and his people and live. Jeremiah chapter 27, verse 12.
Well, it certainly sounds like we should obey the law of man, doesn't it? And if Paul was writing something that might have gotten confused in translation, he probably draws what he has written from these passages. So there is a big however. Moses, Solomon, and all the other writers always put Creator's instructions first, because that is our primary responsibility. There's some other people who knew this. Peter in Acts 5:29. Peter and the other apostles replied, we must obey God rather than men. Who can forget? And this one's important. Exodus 1:17. The midwives, however, feared God and did not do as the king of Egypt had instructed. They let the boys live. Pharaoh had said, we're going to kill all of the Hebrew babies. But this tremendous act of defiance by a small group of ladies at the time said, we're not going to do that. We're not going to do that. We'll figure it out. We'll figure it out. They chose the third option. Oh, the baby was born before we got there. Right? Oh, this happened and the baby lived. We are called to protect the innocent. And that's what these ladies were doing. Now, there's about to be a huge controversy in the United States that's kind of like this, right? It's along these lines. And it's probably going to come in the next few weeks. The news is going to be filled with it. And you know what? If you all know any of the lawyers that are going to be involved with this, you need to share this with them, because what I'm about to say is going to help them or harm them immensely. The 14th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution grants citizenship to those born in the United States. It begins, a person born or naturalized in the United States and this is subject to the jurisdiction thereof. Now, this controversy, which has never been tested in the Supreme Court of the United States the way it needs to be for what's going to happen, it's never been there. It's never been tried. It's just been accepted by some of the population. The amendment was originally written to grant former slaves citizenship. There was a test in the late 19th century where some Chinese immigrants who came in properly, had a child, they went back to China, and they weren't going to let them back in. And the Supreme Court said, you know what, in this case, yeah, he needs to be here. He was born here, he needs to be here. But the problem is, the controversy is that some women are choosing to come into the nation illegally. They're coming in for selfish reasons. They don't knock on the door and say, can we come in? They sneak in, the child is born, and then they expect all sorts of assistance and help raising the child. There's a tradition in the United States that we don't separate families. But what does the Bible say about that? What does the Bible say about separating families? Matthew 10:34 through 36. Don't assume I've come to bring peace to the earth. I have not come to bring peace but a sword. I have come to turn a man against his father, a daughter against his mother, a daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law. A man's enemies will be members of his own household. That's right. Right there is separation of family. In Micah 7:6, for a son dishonors his father, a daughter rises against her mother, and a daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law. A man's enemies are the members of his own household. Sound familiar? Wonder where you should have got that from. Got it from Micah. I could go, well, no, I'm going down a rabbit trail here. All right? There are a lot of people in the United States who want to have children but are not able to, and so they choose to adopt, right? My niece adopted a child from an Indian reservation. We have close friends who have adopted children from China and other places. Adoption is expensive and cumbersome. Why? Why does it cost more to adopt a child than to have a natural birth? Right? After all, we're called to care for the fatherless. We're called to care for the fatherless. Why is it so expensive? Adoption's become big business. And in my opinion, it's also become a form of child trafficking. But here's the thing. If you are trading children for profit, it's child trafficking, right? I think we can consider a mother who sneaks into any nation illegally for the purpose of having a child born in that nation where they think they're going to be able to receive benefits without being productive. That mother is involved in child trafficking. Folks, we have a long way to go, not only in this country, but in a lot of countries to sort this out and get it right. I hope that we can regulate this to conform with and not conflict with the Bible. Right? So, is it okay, and this is the question that the Supreme Court of the United States is going to struggle with in the next several weeks, is it okay to remove a child from a mother or send both back. That's what they have to decide. That is going to be that's a decision I don't want to make. I know what I'd say, but that's a decision I don't really want to make. If the mother sneaks in anywhere, think about that. Somebody sneaks into your house. They didn't come through the door. They sneak into your house, and they expect you to take care of them simply because they're there? I'm not sure. I don't know many people who would do that. I know a few people who would do that, but I don't know many. Not at all. Not at all. Oh, I'm just going to sit here and eat bonbons and watch television all day. That's not going to happen. Not in my house. Our kids even had chores to do, right? And I think they're better off for it today. So, is a believer to follow the man-made laws or the laws of the Creator? Well, both when possible and feasible. Is a believer who receives a speeding violation a sinner? It kind of depends on the circumstance, actually. Are you speeding to protect innocent life? Maybe you've got a mother on board who is having a baby and you need to get to the hospital. I know somebody who got stopped for that. She's sitting right across from me.
Yeah, I did.
Taking our daughter to the hospital, got pulled over. When the cop realized what was going on, it was like, "Oh, follow me." Are you speeding to protect innocent life, or is your action going to cause harm to innocent life? That's the difference. That is the difference. If you're going 120 miles an hour and a 25 mile an hour speed limit, and I know that's not going to make a lot of sense to folks who are not using miles, they're using kilometers, but I didn't do the math there. I'm sorry. If you're really speeding and you in a place where you really shouldn't be, yeah, you probably deserve what you get. Not only from the fines and the violations there, but you get what you get when the Almighty looks at you and says, "You know what? You were being selfish here because it's your fault." Is a believer that lies, and we've talked about this before, is a believer who lies to protect innocent life a sinner? Absolutely not. Remember when the Creator was trying to find a way to convince Ahab? Let me read this. 1 Kings 22, beginning of verse 20. The Lord said, "Who will entice Ahab to march up and fall at Ramah Gilead?" And one suggested this and another that. Then a spirit came forward, standing in front of the Almighty, and he says, "I'll entice him." The Almighty replied, "By what means?" And he said, "I will go out and be a lying spirit in the mouth of his prophets. You surely will entice him and prevail, said the Lord. Go and do it." Not only did he agree to it, he said, "Your plan's going to work." The Almighty himself sent a spirit to be a lying prophet, a lying spirit in the mouth of Ahab's prophets. If it's to protect innocent life, you can do that. Maybe a neighbor that, their marriage is in trouble, and one of them knocks on the door and says, "I've got to leave town for a few days," just letting you know, and you know that they've been abused. When the other spouse comes over and says, "Do you know where so-and-so is?" What are you going to tell them? What are you going to tell them? Nope, have no idea. They just said they were leaving town for a few days. Maybe you know where they are, maybe you don't. Are you protecting innocent life? Probably. Probably. Think about these things. We don't have to call it a little white lie, right? It's a lie, but it's a lie that defends and protects innocent life. Huge, huge difference between doing that, saying, "Oh yeah, this car it's a gem. It'll last you the rest of your natural life," and they know it's a piece of junk. See, that's lying for personal gain. Big difference, right? It all comes down to this. If you're in a position where you need to choose between following God or king or government, man's law. If man's law says you need to separate yourself from God in some way, you choose God. Like Daniel, Meshach, Shadrach, Abednego, the list goes on. If man's law says that you should allow the innocent to be harmed, you need to follow God's rules. Want to know where I got the title for God's Universe, God's Rules? Doing research for this kind of thing right here. If man's law is intended to harm someone unjustly, you follow God. The king says, we're going to kill all the purple people. You find a way around it. You use the third option. If man's law tries to prevent you from protecting innocent life, you follow God. Now, there's a lot of man's law all over the world that conform to the Creator's word. There's some that conflict with it, and some do neither, right? Some are just sometimes inherently dumb. There used to be a law in certain cities in the United States where you couldn't spit in the gutter, and that's where the sidewalk and the road meet, right? There were laws in some places, you can't tie your horse in front of the bank. There were no hitching rails in front of the bank, right? Now, neither of these laws would be considered either in any way biblical. They're simply a way of making sure that society gets along as peacefully as possible. In the case of don't spit in the gutter, you don't want to be offensive to somebody. They used to call them delicate ladies back in the day when that law was written. They thought it was disgusting. You didn't want to do that in front of them. They wanted a way to protect the delicate ladies. I know some ladies that can spit better than I can. So, and the reason they didn't want horses tied in front of a bank, if somebody was actually robbing the bank, they didn't want them to have a way to escape rapidly, right? They wanted them to take some time to get away from there. So, if you choose to violate one of man's laws, you need to understand why it needs to be done, and you should have enough biblical knowledge to be able to defend yourself on that if necessary. Daniel, look, king, I got to do what I got to do. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, we are not bowing down to an idol because our God says don't do it. That's all they needed. That's all they needed to know. So, you don't need a theology PhD. Probably wouldn't help you anyway. But you don't need that for the basic, simple truths that you should be living by. And I hope that this information has helped you in some way kind of wade through some of the questions you might be having with that. Am I okay if I do this? Well, if the Bible says this, then this is going on. And governments need to understand, especially the United States, if the laws of the United States are going to continue to be founded in the Judeo-Christian model, then they need to be founded in the Judeo-Christian model. And what I just explained, I don't think that the Muslim population would have a huge issue with, because that does come from the law of Abraham as well. So, good luck to all of the folks that are going to be involved making that decision. And until Thursday, we do wish you many, many blessings, everyone.
Yes, we do.